For over a century, the 8th of March has been International Women's Day. It's an opportunity to celebrate the accomplishments of women around the world, as well as draw attention to the issues still hindering true equality between genders. Today's lesson is a chance for you to learn how to talk effectively about the issue of gender equality. Are you ready? Let's do it. Thanks for inviting me to come on this march with you, Trudy.
You're welcome, Gertie. There's a real sense of sisterhood here, isn't there?
Yes, very much so. But I was under the impression that we had already reached gender equality here in the Western world. We're seeing more balanced representation in leadership roles, be it in government or in business. My generation definitely has had more opportunities than my grandmother's ever did. In her days, women rarely worked after getting married and were chained to the kitchen sink while their husbands went out to work as the sole breadwinners in the family.
You're right that gender roles are changing, and we do have a more level playing field than our grandmothers did. It's definitely more socially acceptable for women to work and for men to do chores these days. But we live in a patriarchy, and the gender gap still very much exists. Only about a third of top positions in businesses are held by women. So, although the glass ceiling is starting to crack, we are still far from seeing it shatter. Worldwide, women earn 77 cents for every dollar men make, so the pay gap is still quite wide. Another thing, let me ask you a question. How do you feel when you see a female bus driver or pilot?
Well, it's quite unusual, isn't it?
Well, it's these kinds of unconscious biases that show us that in no way are we close to true equality between the genders. A woman can fly a plane just as well as a man, just like a man can be as caring and dutiful a nurse as a woman, but there are still gender stereotypes that need to be challenged.
You've really given me something to think about. I hope it gave you something to think about too. So, let's look in more detail at the words and phrases Trudy and I used in our discussion.
There's a real sense of sisterhood here, isn't there?
Trudy talks about a sense of sisterhood. Does this mean a warm, friendly atmosphere or a cold, hateful relationship between women? It means the atmosphere is warm and friendly. A sisterhood is a supportive bond between women. But I was under the impression that we had already reached gender equality here in the Western world. I say that I thought we had gender equality in the West. Does this mean that people are treated the same or differently because of their gender? It means the same. Gender equality means that people of all genders have the same rights and opportunities. We're seeing more balanced representation in leadership roles, be it in government or in business. I mentioned balanced representation in leadership roles. Do you think this means an unfair mix of genders or a fair one? It means a fair mix of people. If a group has balanced representation, it has a fair proportion of different genders. It can also be said about any minorities, a balanced representation of ethnic groups, for example. In her days, women rarely worked after getting married and were chained to the kitchen sink. I say that women of my grandmother's generation were chained to the kitchen sink. Does this mean they relaxed or did a lot of chores? They did a lot of chores. If you are chained to the kitchen sink, you spend a lot of time doing household chores, while their husbands went out to work as the sole breadwinners in the family. I say that men in my grandmother's generation were the sole breadwinners in the family. Does this mean they earned money or baked? It means they earned money. A breadwinner is the person who earns money to provide for their family.
You're right that gender roles are changing.
Trudy says that gender roles are changing. Are gender roles rules about behavior or expectations? They are societal expectations. Gender roles are what society finds to be acceptable behavior based on gender.
And we do have a more level playing field than our grandmothers did.
Trudy says that we have a more level playing field than our grandmothers did. Does this mean that everybody has a fair chance, or only some people? It means everyone has a chance. A level playing field is a situation where everybody has the same opportunity to be successful.
But we live in a patriarchy, and the gender gap still very much exists.
Trudy says we live in a patriarchy in which the gender gap still exists. Does this mean that men have a disadvantage or an advantage? They have an advantage. A patriarchy is a society led and shaped by men. If women lead a society, it's a matriarchy. And the gender gap is an undesirable difference between genders in spheres such as economics, education, or employment.
Only about a third of top positions in businesses are held by women. So, although the glass ceiling is starting to crack, we are still far from seeing it shatter.
Trudy mentions the glass ceiling. Is this a boost towards success or a barrier? It's a barrier. The glass ceiling is an invisible barrier which stops women from advancing to high positions within the organization they work at.
Worldwide, women earn 77 cents for every dollar men make, so the pay gap is still quite wide.
Trudy talks about a pay gap. Does this mean that men and women have similar incomes or different? It means different incomes. The pay gap, or gender pay gap, refers to an unfair difference in income between genders.
How do you feel when you see a female bus driver or pilot?
Well, it's quite unusual, isn't it?
Well, it's these kinds of unconscious biases that show us that in no way are we close to true equality between the genders.
Trudy talks about unconscious bias. Does this mean you see everyone as being the same, or are some people different? It means you see some people as different. Unconscious bias is a prejudice against certain people in certain situations, but one that you are unaware of having because you've been conditioned to think this way.
A man can be as caring and dutiful a nurse as a woman, but there are still gender stereotypes that need to be challenged.
Trudy says we need to challenge gender stereotypes. Does gender stereotypes mean that people of the same gender are expected to act in one certain way or in many different ways? It means they should act in one way. A gender stereotype is a generalized view of how people of one gender should behave and act. Okay, so now that we've looked at what these phrases mean, let's move on to part 3, where you can practice using these terms in conversation. Remember that you need to see new words a lot of times before you can use them yourself, so download the flashcard set to get more confident with these words and phrases from today. So, in this part of the video, you will get the chance to talk to me using some of the phrases we looked at in part 2. My friend Rachel is here to help out.
Hey there, I'm Rachel.
I will ask a question, and a model answer will appear on the screen. Some of the words are in red because you need to replace them with a word or phrase from the lesson. I'll give you 10 seconds to think and read the answer out loud before Rachel tells you the answer. Remember to pause the video if you need more time. Shall we give them an example, Rachel?
Sure, why not?
What do you like most about your women's hiking group, Rachel?
I love that we're all there to support each other. There's a fantastic sense of sisterhood, you know?
Okay, are we ready to start?
I certainly am, Gertie.
Let's do it. How do you like being an engineer?
Well, it can be hard working in a male-dominated field. Although we have a more or less level playing field when it comes to entry-level jobs, there's definitely a glass ceiling as most higher positions in my company are filled by men.
Why do you think that is?
I think the gender stereotype of men being more analytical and women being more emotional plays a part in this, leading to unconscious bias against women applying for leadership roles.
Do you think this will change in the future?
I think so, yes. More women are studying STEM subjects at university level these days, so I'm hopeful that the gender gap will become narrower as more women enter the field.
How is your life different to your grandmother's?
Well, I think I have more opportunities than she ever did. She married young and was chained to the kitchen sink once my mother and her siblings came along, with my grandfather being the breadwinner in the family.
How are things for your generation?
We're moving away from traditional gender roles, so women in my generation can pretty much support ourselves. There is still a pay gap, of course. More women than men stay at home or work fewer hours in order to dedicate more time to their children, which leads to women earning less money than men, generally.
And how do you think life will be different for your granddaughters?
Well, it's hard to say. I hope that we'll be seeing a more balanced representation of genders in government, challenging the patriarchy which has been shaping society for centuries. So, yes, I'd like to think that we will have moved closer to gender equality by their time.
So, that's all for today. I hope you found this lesson useful as well as thought-provoking. Don't forget to download the flashcards by following the link in the comments, and I'll see you in the next episode of Let's Talk About. Goodbye.
See you!